Close your eyes and listen to the world around you. The hum of the refrigerator, the distant roar of an engine, or the quiet vibration of a phone. We take these sounds for granted. But what if I told you that for 99% of human existence, this loud, fast, electricity-filled world was impossible? For 10,000 years, humanity followed a single unbreakable rhythm, the sun and the seasons. Imagine you are a merchant in the year 1700. Your life is no different from a merchant in ancient Rome or medieval China. Your world moves at the speed of a horse and the strength of the human arm. Then, in a small corner of the globe, something suddenly changed. A coal-powered spark ignited a fire that would not only build factories, but completely redefine what it meant to be human. Why did it happen at that moment? And more importantly, what was the hidden price our ancestors paid so that you could live the life you have today? Over the next 20 minutes, Tim will not simply give you a history lesson. We will dive into the smoke-filled alleys of 18th century England. I will reveal 5 pillars that led to industrial dominance that no one talks about, and the dark secrets behind the machines that saved us. After this video, you will never look at work cities or your clock the same way again. At the time, England sat on a mountain of coal, but coal alone was not enough. It was the perfect combination of political stability, geographic advantage, and a culture of bold experimentation. But there was something else, a secret ingredient: high wages. Because hiring a person was so expensive, English entrepreneurs had a greedy and desperate incentive to replace humans with machines. This was the birth of mechanical workers, an invisible army that never grew tired and never slept. You see, before the gears began to turn, the world was gentle. It was made of wool and linen, spun by hands that understood the texture of every thread. But then the desire for something better, something lighter appeared: cotton. They called it white gold. But every gold rush hides a trap. In the early 1700s, England was losing. They could not compete with India. Indian artisans produced cloth so fine it felt like a second skin, and they did it at a cost 5 times cheaper than an English worker. The British government even tried to respond with laws banning imported cotton cloth to protect domestic products. But you cannot ban a revolution. Instead of stopping trade, these laws pushed English thinkers into a corner. They had to innovate or go bankrupt. Imagine a line of dominoes. The first piece fell in 1733 when John Kay invented the flying shuttle. Suddenly, one weaver could work twice as fast. But a problem emerged: the yarn crisis. It took 8 manual spinners to supply enough thread for a single weaver. The system was broken. This bottleneck led to the creation of the spinning jenny by James Hargreaves, a machine that could spin many threads at once. It was compact, small enough to fit inside a cottage, but it was like a Trojan horse. It marked the beginning of the end of traditional family life. Soon after, Richard Arkwright developed the water-powered spinning frame. This monster was too large for a cottage. It needed the roar and relentless force of a river. Arkwright did not just build a machine, he built the first true factory in the world. He realized that to make the most money, you had to separate work from the home and bring it under your roof, under your rules. By the time Samuel Crompton combined these inventions into the spinning mule, the human hand officially became obsolete. In 1750, England imported 2.5 million pounds of raw cotton. By 1850, that number had surged to 588 million pounds. Manchester was no longer a town, it was the city of cotton with 900 factories. But look closely at the workers, look into their eyes. The hum of the shuttles was not the song of progress, it was the sound of an entire class of artisans being destroyed. Millions of skilled weavers in India and England were left with nothing. While textile factories spun clothing for the world, another revolution was happening underground. England craved coal to fuel its new demand, but the deeper miners dug, the more they risked drowning. Coal mines constantly flooded. Traditional pumps were like trying to empty an ocean with a teaspoon. Thomas Newcomen appeared with a clumsy, inefficient iron monster, the first successful piston steam engine. It was loud, heavy, and wasted enormous amounts of energy. But because it stood right beside the coal mine, fuel was free. This machine allowed humans to go deeper underground than ever before, truly opening the door to the planet's hidden energy. Then a Scotsman arrived and changed the fate of our species, James Watt. Watt looked at Newcomen's engine and saw failure. He realized the machine wasted steam by cooling the cylinder after every stroke. Together with his business partner Matthew Boulton, Watt added a separate condenser. This was not just a technical adjustment, it was a revolution. By making the engine efficient, Watt freed factories from dependence on rivers. Suddenly, you did not need a waterfall to run machinery anymore, you only needed coal. A factory could be built anywhere, in the middle of a field or in the heart of a crowded city. But steam engines needed iron frames. For centuries, iron had been smelted with charcoal, limited by how many trees you could cut down. The Darby family changed that by using coke, a refined form of coal. This allowed the creation of massive blast furnaces and an explosion in iron production. In 1779, the first iron bridge was built, a structure that announced to the planet that a new era had arrived. But think about the men producing this iron. Ironworking was brutal and dangerous. Few survived to the age of 40. Their short and painful lives were the fuel for bridges, factories, and later the railways that would bind the world together. Imagine the astonishment. In 1800, only 3% of the world's population lived in cities. By the end of the century, that number had approached 50%. People were pushed off their ancestral lands by enclosure and pulled into cities by the promise of steady wages. But the promise was a lie. Manchester became the model for this new world. Its population exploded from 10,000 in 1717 to more than 2.3 million by the early 20th century. Yet this growth was chaotic and unplanned. Families were crammed into overcrowded slums, living in shacks with dirt floors and no sanitation. Friedrich Engels, in his observations of the English working class, described the back streets of Manchester as a desert of stone. He saw rivers turn green from chemical waste and raw sewage. The stench of progress was part of daily life. Clean water was a luxury, and diseases such as gastrointestinal infections and typhoid became epidemics. By the mid-19th century, life expectancy in these industrial centers had dropped sharply. In some areas, more than half of all children died before the age of 5. Inside the factories, a new discipline was enforced. In the rural world, work followed the sun and the seasons. In the factory, work followed the clock. The factory system demanded that humans adapt to the speed of machines. Shifts lasted 12 to 14 hours, 6 days a week. Most early textile workers were unmarried women and children. Child labor was not new, but the industrial system made it more visible and far harsher. Take a moment to think about a child you know, perhaps your son, daughter, or niece or nephew. Now imagine them at 8 years old, not in a classroom, but crawling on their stomach beneath a forest of moving steel. This was the reality of the Industrial Revolution. Child labor was not new, but the factory turned it into a cold and efficient system of exploitation. These children were called scavengers. Their job was to crawl under fast-moving machines to collect fallen cotton fibers. One wrong move, one moment of exhaustion, and the machine would take a piece of their body or their life. Other children were piecers, standing 14 hours a day, their small fingers bleeding as they repaired broken threads. Why children? Because they were small, easy to control, and most importantly cheap. They were paid only 1/10 of an adult's wage. To factory owners, they were not children, they were low-cost units of production. This was the dark side of steam that history books often ignore. But the cries of children eventually reached the halls of power. This deep social crisis led to the first factory laws. Slowly and painfully, legislation began to limit working hours. We began the long journey of moving children from factory floors to classrooms. Yet the scars of stolen childhood remained embedded in the memory of the working class for generations. By the early 1800s, England was producing more than the world could transport. Old muddy roads and slow river barges were choking the revolution. Progress needed speed. First came water. Major projects like the Bridgewater Canal proved that a horse pulling a barge could carry times more cargo than a wagon on land. Coal prices in major cities dropped by half almost overnight. This sparked canal mania, a wave of construction linking major manufacturing centers across England. But even canals soon became too slow for the steam age. Three things made the next leap possible: cheap coke, smelted iron, rolling mills to shape it, and high-pressure steam engines. Innovators like Richard Trevithick and George Stephenson did the unimaginable. They put steam engines on wheels. The opening of the first intercity railway between Liverpool and Manchester was a shocking event. Passengers could now travel between cities in hours instead of days. Railways shattered the isolation of the rural world. They allowed ideas, goods, and people to spread at the speed of steam. The world was shrinking, and for the first time humanity had won the war against distance. For decades, England tried to keep its industrial secrets to itself. Laws were passed to prevent skilled workers from emigrating and to ban the export of machinery. But you cannot lock up an idea when its time has come. Belgium became the second country to industrialize thanks to its rich coal mines. Its landscape quickly transformed like the industrial valleys of northern England. In France, the revolution progressed more slowly and steadily. But Germany was another story. Divided into dozens of small states, Germany lacked a unified market, yet railway construction acted as a catalyst. Railways linked major cities and created enormous demand for steel. By the time Germany unified, the Ruhr Valley had become a heavy industrial powerhouse, eventually leading the world in chemical research and production. Across the Atlantic, the United States followed its own path. Initially a producer of natural resources, America began industrializing after skilled workers memorized English machine designs and brought them across the ocean. Americans added their own innovation, the American system of manufacturing. This meant the development of interchangeable parts. Instead of every object being handcrafted, machines produced identical precision metal parts. This allowed mass production on a scale never seen before. Even in the East, the revolution was taking root. After the Meiji Restoration, Japan made a calculated decision to catch up with the West. The government built railways, improved roads, and funded model steel and textile factories. Thousands of students were sent abroad to learn modern science and technology. By the end of the century, Japan had transformed from a feudal society into a modern industrial power. Not everyone welcomed the new age. For many craftsmen, the Industrial Revolution was a disaster. Skilled weavers who had spent years mastering their craft suddenly found themselves unable to compete with machines. This desperation led to the Luddite movement, where workers broke into factories and smashed the machines that had stolen their livelihoods. The government responded with force, protecting the new industry at any cost. In the countryside, laborers destroyed threshing machines because they believed the machines made their labor unnecessary. These were the screams of an old world fading away. But from this unrest, a new kind of organization was born: labor unions. Workers realized that while one person was powerless, 1,000 people could halt production. Despite early bans, unions gradually won the right to strike, forcing improvements in wages and working conditions. In the world of ideas, the revolution sparked a great philosophical debate. Thinkers like Karl Marx looked at the factories of Manchester and saw a system of exploitation that he believed would lead to a total social transformation. On the other hand, romantic thinkers, poets, and artists were horrified by the dark, monstrous mills. They mourned the loss of nature and traditional rural life, emphasizing the importance of the human spirit over the monstrous machine. Even the environment began to react. The origins of the modern environmental movement lie in the response to the smoke pollution of the 19th century. Laws were eventually passed to regulate toxic gases released by chemical factories. Scientists began to trace links between polluted water and disease, leading to the construction of massive new sewage systems to carry waste away from rivers that had become open sewers. By the mid-19th century, the first industrial revolution had matured, but a second wave was arriving. This era would not be defined by iron and steam, but by steel, chemicals, and electricity. The invention of the Bessemer process allowed mass production of steel, stronger and more flexible than iron. It enabled the construction of skyscrapers and massive industrial corporations. Oil began replacing coal, and the internal combustion engine opened the door to the automobile industry. Electricity brought a new kind of magic. Gas lamps, which had allowed factories to operate late into the night, were replaced by electrical grids. The rhythm of the city became eternal, 24 hours a day. The age of mass consumption had arrived. Shopping became a cultural activity as large department stores offered a wide range of goods to the new middle class. The world was now connected by telegraph, and for the first time information traveled faster than a human could run. Look at the screen you are holding in your hand. Look at the clothes you are wearing. You are the direct descendant of that first coal-powered spark in the 1700s. The Industrial Revolution did not just build our cities, it fundamentally redefined what it means to be human. We transformed from a species that followed the slow rhythms of the seasons into one that demands the world move at the speed of machines. We inherited a world of endless convenience and breathtaking speed, but we also carry its weight. The stench of progress has evolved into a global climate crisis. The social divisions created in the 18th century still haunt our politics today. The revolution began as a solution to poverty and ended by changing far more than it ever intended. Revolutions arrive quietly, and by the time we notice them, we can no longer imagine life without them. I am Tim, an observer of the past, so that we can understand the present, and together we keep history alive. I will see you in the next era.